listening to Rogue State of Mind. This is episode 309, formerly called Mitolife Radio. I rebranded the show to more reflect my rogue status in the natural health community. Today, I'm interviewing Brian Johnson. There are several Brian Johnsons in the health realm now. This one is with the company Synergy 360. And he helps people create the world's healthiest living environments. So he'll work with people on new construction, starting from scratch, renovations. He's really good at helping people mitigate all sorts of different pollution that comes with modern homes. This was a fun show for me because I purchased a prefab log cabin from an Amish company called Zook Cabins out of Pennsylvania. And it was great. It got up here literally a week before Christmas. It was dozered up my driveway and rolled onto a concrete foundation. Just miraculous timing with the weather. It was just a weird winter where the snow didn't start until pretty much mid to late January, where the snow is actually sticking. So it worked out for me getting stuff done, which is rare in the winter. Usually everything slows down up here in the north. But I'm also working on renovating an underground bunker. And after I purchased this mountain last year, I put 3-4 months of a lot of time and labor and getting screwed over by contractors. It's definitely a stressful process building from scratch because there's so many personalities. You don't know if people are shady. But the cool thing that you can control is the planning of going into, what's the conduit that the wire's in? What are you using for insulation? What materials are you building from? All of that is in your control. And this is what Brian teaches. So in this show, he talks about how homes are built, basically out of paper mache and wood. I ask him his thoughts on Tyvek. He talks about mold and his whole thoughts on preventing mold and what happens if it's there. He talks about why he likes ICCF instead of regular ICF, insulated concrete foam. I ask him his thoughts on ozone. We talk about lighting and the nuances that go into LED versus incandescent. And he is actually more of a fan of LED, which really shocked me. He shares a lot of practical EMF tips. I ask him his thoughts on the Y-Shield EMF blocking paint, his thoughts on dirty electricity, why he doesn't recommend the Starlink router, his thoughts on smart meters and how to mitigate that. Ask him about shielded clothing, grounding. Ask him about air quality and ventilation and filtration. Then I ask him a few listener questions, including gas versus electric ranges for cooking, his thoughts on hemp blocks, the healthiest, cost-effective insulation option. A little bit on solar panels and inverters, because I have a lot of history with those and how to mitigate the effects of those. And then does the shape of the home matter? This was a really fun one. And whether you just want to make your home healthier or whether you're building from scratch, I think there's a lot you'll get from it. So enjoy. Here is Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson, welcome to the show.
Matt, thanks for having me on your show. Such a pleasure to be here. I think we have a lot of amazing things to share.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we've gone back and forth a few times on the phone, and I think our mutual friend Todd Shipman connected us, and he recommended you on my show, and I started watching your reels on Instagram and see how you were talking about really innovative ways to build homes using different materials. And being that a lot of people know that I'm building out an underground bunker, and I'm really into ceramic, the GeoShip product, the domes and stuff. It's just a fascinating area to me. I would imagine most people, though, are probably not going there. I mean, we're probably decades away from ceramic being the the material, right? Most homes are or what just drywall and or stick frame or cabins or yeah, what are most people doing nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, even with the the typical architecture, I mean, obviously there's so many different forms of architecture, and I'll tell you, like the domes and all these different modern building materials and startup companies, and these companies putting together these module systems, and matter of fact, I looked to team up with a couple of them, in their startup phases. But for me, I was looking for something a little more kind of mainstream, a little practical. I know there's a lot of cool things going around the world right now, but for me, I was trying to bring something that was, practical for a general contractor, right? To build with kind of like our current building materials, that are more readily available. Unfortunately, a lot of homes are still, you know, I mean, they're just built out of paper mache, and sticks, right? It's getting better. I see, even in the last 4 years, the market's really cleaned up. We're starting to see a lot more non-toxic building materials, or more, energy efficiency has been a thing, but that's also been a big problem too, of what created a lot of indoor, issues, right? Because we were building these envelopes too tight. Now we're using plastic to wrap the home. Now the home's not breathable, right? There's no like lack of filtration. The filtration is so minimal. They're just relying on the manufacturer's, specifications, right? For like air filtration. So now here you have this tight home with the lack of air filtration, and then it's basically, we're building sick homes. That's what we're still doing, but yeah, we're starting to see a little bit of a shift in the industry, and so that's where I came in. You and I have a very similar background. When you got into longevity and health and wellness, and I call it biohacking. It's funny because it's kind of like your paradigm shift was probably about when my shift. It was kind of like, was it like 2017? Is that kind of when you really started shifting everything out?
I mean, I started in 2010 with grounding, and I remember sending my dad to the basement to put a ground rod in the dirt. And it was like, I don't know, beginning of 2010 or something. And they thought I was nuts. And to this day, I'm grounding with a ground rod in the earth
Oh man,
15
yeah.
years later.
We'll
But
have a discussion on that one for sure.
definitely, yeah, it's such a nuanced topic. And I know could be issues there, but
I don't think
mostly it's
so.
with plugging
I
into the
think
wall. But
I
yeah,
think
no,
you I think you're 2010, man. You're even ahead of me.
that's awesome. Yeah, but as far as air filtration, water filtration, that's where I started before even supplements and nutrition and stuff. And I just wanted to take a step back. You talked about tight homes, like you said we're wrapping homes in plastic. Are you referring to Tyvek? Because I've been seeing that stuff all over my mountain as I've been building out the
Yeah.
acreage with.
Tyvek's come a long ways too. Now there's everything has like a permeability rate to it.
Okay.
So basically it's blocking, the air from moving, but allowing a little bit of moisture. If it was to get in, then it can go back out, right? So Tyvek's come a long ways too. So yeah, I definitely, we'll use, well, not me personally, and we'll share the ways how I build. But I want to give a shout out to these different materials and how they're used, and I think that's a good example. I think there's a lot better materials than Tyvek out there, me personally, but that's kind of like the go-to for a general contractor wrapping a
Yeah.
house. There's definitely way better materials to use than Tyvek for sure.
I figured, yeah, and it sounds really annoying when it's flapping in the wind. I've learned that the last couple of months of listening to it. So you're triple certified with the Building Biology Institute, right? Is that where you learned a lot of this from?
Yeah, yeah. So kind of like in that 2017 shift for me was, hey, there's all these amazing technologies out there. People are talking about lighting and
Mhm.
circadian and air purification and UV filtration and HEPA filtration. All these different EMFs, right? Become this topic, and So me as a builder, because I started building in 2003, got my general contractor's license in 2002. In 2003, just went right into building concrete homes because I just wanted to get into something different. I didn't. I wish I could say now that it was intentional then, that I was building these environments by default that were kind of like mold free and very high performance. But I just got into it because I worked in the lumber industry so long. I just wanted to get away from lumber and build with something different, like such as concrete. Um, but kind of fast forwarding, you know, the background in the building with concrete, and then being really big into competing, being an athlete, mountain biking, Xterra, triathlons, Ironmans, all these things. Here I'm exposing myself to all these chemicals. Just you're 30 years old, not really kind of, wearing all the proper, protective gear. We're bulletproof. We're doing all these things, and what happened is my toxicity just had gone through the roof, and I was working on a lot of buildings where we're doing renovations where there was a lot of mold, and so I started developing like brain fog, and of course then I didn't know what it was, and so it started getting into the integrative, functional, and that's led me into the biohacking. Then of course, here's all these modalities, all these technologies, and I thought we need to be building homes like this. With the home needs to become the modality. And that's really kind of what brought me into thinking outside of the box, right? So here I am, I'm putting this program together. I had property, I built several spec homes, and I built them. I spent my own millions of dollars on my own to build a spec home. Just was it over engineered? Did I waste a lot of money? Was it something that was going to work out the way that I want? And I wanted to do it on my dime, but I knew I was confident that these were going to work out. Well, through the process, that's where because I'm searching high and low. I wanted to know, like, hey, is holistic homes, is healthy homes, back in about 2018, 2019. Is that really a thing? Like, am I building for the 0.01% of the population? Is this a good model or not? Right? Does this make sense to do? And there was a little bit of stuff out there, but that's how I stumbled upon the Building Biology Institute. And it was just a game changer for me because, again, I'm already into integrative, functional medicine. So I understand that side of the world, right? I understand from performance building, but building biology really combines deep science into building, and they have so many different facets and certifications. I ended up doing all three certifications because I wanted to know. It took a couple of years to go through all three certifications. It wasn't one of those things that you just want to hurry up and rush through and just say, hey, I'm a certified building biologist. This was like the information, the knowledge was just insane, from understanding EMFs to understanding environmental impacts to understanding development and community building. They really have a cohesive, it's an amazing program, and I encourage everybody for it, but yeah, to do it. But anyways, yeah, went through that, and it was really a game changer for me because it really kind of put everything. I knew I was on the right path, right? And I was already building biology before I started really understanding the science. That just took it to a whole nother level for me, for sure.
That's amazing. It's funny that you say, you asked the question, are you building for, what do you say, 0.1% of the population or something? Because I'd imagine in your field, like even being in the supplement area, sect of the natural health world, I just see a lot of people don't care about, well, let's just say people that aren't in the health world don't really care until they're sick, right? And then
Yep.
then they start doing stuff. And I'd imagine that's even for people in the health community, like thinking about the health of your home and the building materials, like what's in the walls, that's like back of the mind, right? So low priority.
Out of sight, out of mind, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's
Almost
a tough
just like
thing.
the EMF, the silent one, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been diving back into that with dirty electricity. I think I told you on the phone I set up my caretakers up the mountain with an off-grid system from EcoFlow. It's kind of like what's it, Jaggery system. It's like a plug and play I think Goal Zero is another one. It's one of those like plug and play inverter battery solar systems,
Yep.
which that's the last one I'll ever buy because they're all smart. And then the
Yep.
inverter is just so dirty. So I was going around
Yep.
with the EMI meter from both Static Shield and Green Wave, and they're both almost identical readings. But the millivolts was just off the charts, like over 1,000 in
I was
every
going to
single
say, yeah,
outlet.
you're into volts. You're beyond millivolts.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was like almost hitting 2,000. So yeah, it's wild. I think people have this misconception that, they see me and yes, being around trees helps. I definitely feel it being in the forest versus down in San Diego, like I was just down there for my brother's birthday. I definitely feel calmer, and I do think there's an aspect of no matter what your EMF environment is, if you're in the mountains around a lot of really big trees, dense trees, there is a
Hmm.
grounding effect, right? Even
Yeah.
if there's Wi-Fi and stuff going on.
Yeah, 100% too, because you're not in a Faraday cage either, right? Like, so all of, if there are, distant, cellular towers or, radio towers, I mean, that's emitting outwardly too. And then plus two being in that canopy of trees, you're in a high negative ionic environment, which I'm like really big on that too. And I know you are. It's the negative ions, it's the natural environment, kind of it absorbs and suppresses and mitigates these airborne fields, if you will. Of course, it's not going to be 100%, and then we'll get into the building science, of what we're creating on the inside,
Yeah. So why did you move away from concrete? Because now that I'm going to be living in a concrete structure, hopefully by before next winter, it seems like a superior material. Like right now, there's major leaking. I was telling you, so I have to pour a new lid over the whole thing, and it's basically demo. There were kids partying in it for the last 20 years. But I think concrete doesn't like mold can't attach to concrete as easily as common building materials. Do I have that right? Or
Now mold can grow anywhere,
okay.
if you have the right amount of humidity, you have the right amount of moisture, mold's pretty much going to grow on any surface, really. It's going to take over. It's 80% of the Earth's biomass, right? We can't escape it. However, concrete with lime, the comprised material and the makeup and the permeability rate of it's less likely to grow mold because it needs a food source, right? So it's typically organic materials and dust and things that blow out onto the concrete. Again, with that perfect temperature and humidity, the mold's actually feeding on the food surface on top of the concrete, not the concrete itself.
Okay.
And thank you for asking that
Yep.
question and allow me to elaborate. I didn't get away from concrete construction. I'm still in concrete construction, but what I did get away from, and this is just we're just kind of throwing little nuggets and tidbits of information out there, was I was using ICF. So ICF is called insulated concrete form. And when I started building, and I was building using these methods, and I'm very transparent because that's how we learn, as I was using foam block, styrene,
I've seen a lot of that.
you
Yeah,
know,
here. Yep.
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 And there's nothing, and believe me, I was even like, okay, hey, I know it's not a green product, right? Never promoted it, never pushed it as a green product, but I did push it as I was trying to push the agenda of it being a healthy product because it's outgassed. I'm actually encapsulating it. There's no outgassing, but I did a lot of air quality sampling around different ICF homes, different methods, and using like Prism laboratories. We're talking like big laboratories for measuring different types of VOCs, very elaborate tests, and we were picking up styrene in the
Wow.
and it had an effect on the air quality, and so what that was where it was leading me into by the way, I've worked on a lot of what's called LEED, LEED projects that are promoted by the U.S. Green Building Council. Been working on lead projects for over 15 plus years, and it was there was a lot of greenwashing going on. It was very opportunistic industry. It didn't feel good. And so I knew when I went on my own to create, Synergy 360 and the certification program, what I'm doing, it's like I'm going to re-educate everybody of the difference between green, eco-friendly, sustainable, and health. Like the health, those have nothing to do with health. If you're building something that's truly green, non-toxic, then it meets all the criteria for a lot of these other things. Sustainability is a piece to where we still have to, it's a fine line, because if you're just building, Adobe, and you're not tying a little bit of some kind of binders in there to create something sustainable, that Adobe building's not going to last very long, right? So it's using a lot of modernized different components there to create that same sustainability using like non-toxic building materials. But so I knew that building ICF wasn't really truly a green product, and I wanted to promote Synergy 360, promote myself as a builder is building green. And so what I had done, it was a beautiful transition. There was a company out there that I promote, and the company is called Wall. And there's another company in Canada as well. They're going to probably hurt with these tariff things. Man, that'd be a bummer for them. But anyways, what it is, it's called ICCF, and it's insulated composite concrete forms. And so it's kind of a similar thing to the ICF, but it's a composite block. What they do is they take wood, they grind it. It's recycled wood too. They grind it, they clean it, and then they remineralize it, and it gets put in these big old molds, and it's basically a concrete block is what it is. But they're these massive blocks, and they're lightweight too. You can pick them up. You're not going to hurt yourself. You don't have to mortar. You don't have to grout in between. It's minimal bracing. One thing about ICF construction, and I want to kind of bring this into kind of like making everything mainstream. So my goal was, okay, hey, ICF, we can teach contractors to build across the nation, and you could build any kind of a style architecture, that you want with ICF. That's what I like about it. You're not limited by design. But with the ICF, there was you had to invest like $100,000 in bracing and turnbuckles, and it was actually it's pretty complex. ICF, where the ICCF, it's a very rigid block and minimal bracing and block layers. Like any block layer can lay the stuff, and it's a dream when they get their hands on the stuff and they install ICCF with minimal bracing. It's no different than building a block house. It's the same thing. But the nice thing about the ICCF is you're using mineral rock wool or different forms of insulation inserts that you're putting into the block, and then you're still filling it with concrete. So I'm definitely still in the concrete industry, but you're cutting back about the third of the concrete because it doesn't take as much because you're insulating the block. And then again, you're reinforcing it with steel. And so the nice thing about this is now you have truly a non-toxic green block that's highly insulated. That's, you're reaching, R factors of 32, which is the insulative value. It still absorbs moisture and releases moisture, so it has a good permeability rate to it. It's just good all the way around. Sound, the sound transmission, you're dropping your decibels, tremendously. That's really it's called mass wall construction, and that's really my big piece of what I'm bringing to the industry. Because if we can teach, like general contractors and contractors, hey, all you need to do is bring in a block crew. Guys, a 4-person crew or something like that is all you need, with a lead person that literally can stack the block. It goes fast too. You can build probably a 4,000 square foot home. You can set that block up probably within, less than 2 weeks time, depending on, how much, what the architecture, what's going on with the design.
That's amazing. A huge benefit of going with that style versus traditional foam ICF, is it the permeability? Because you were talking about earlier, like the breathability of materials and how homes are so tight. Does this help with the air exchange? Is that a big?
It does.
Okay.
It actually does the hydrophilic capacity of how it absorbs moisture and releases moisture is super amazing because you can on both sides on the exterior side, just depending on whatever you're using for your siding, right? Your stucco or whether you're doing some kind of a wood siding or whatever. It's a direct bond right over that surface. So you have that permeability rate. Obviously you're still waterproofing from the outside shell. But if water was to get in, you could still do your conventional rain screens. And we could talk a little bit about conventional construction method versus constructional methods. But if water was to get in, it still can breathe back out. But it's definitely, now think about this, you have a solid wall cavity, right? So that water, say it was to come in through a siding or had reached some kind of penetration, well, it's going to be able to escape back out. It's never going to go all the way through the wall because it's a mass wall. So now you've minimized and lessened any of your chances of mold growing within a cavity. Okay. And then on the interior side, what's nice about it is you can just do a direct applied plaster, whether it's a clay-based plaster or a lime-based plaster. You could still drywall. We still use drywall, and I know you mentioned that too. The drywall companies they've really cleaned a lot of things up in the industry. Or also too, I've adapted to more commercialized type of building materials, which that's all I did is I really kind of combined the commercial side of the industry into the residential because the two industries didn't look there was no crossover, but it was like, why are we not using all the same materials in commercial that we because it's just the mentality of like, well, this is residential, these are the materials we use, these are too expensive, that's overkill, why would we even use that? But from looking at it from a healthy home and building science perspective, now we can like, okay, hey, we're going to get rid of papered drywall to like paperless drywall that has fiberglass reinforcement, that they're using more natural antimicrobial properties to them. They're less toxic. I mean, there's still binders in there. I mean, it's not completely a toxic free, but there's no airborne toxicity that you're actually going to measure that. It's just the actual raw materials. I mean, we got to draw a line somewhere. We still have to build a home that's sustainable, but there are a lot of good drywalls out there. And the nice thing about the ICCF is like, you don't even have to follow a 16 center screw pattern for a wall. You can screw anywhere through the drywall right to the ICCF, which is really sweet. Or for furring out, get your walls super straight if you have to clean up your walls. But you can just replace the drywall and just go direct plaster right over the block with minimal anti-fracturing membranes. It's a beautiful system. And that's going to absorb that, again, back to your question, it's going to absorb the humidity. It's going to absorb the CO2 that's airborne in that room. So for example, say your bedroom's all plastered, right? The walls, just with what you're expelling with moisture content and like CO2, those walls are actually absorbing that. So if you had a meter and you're actually, measuring the CO2 levels, you could have a meter in there and have it completely sealed with minimal ventilation, which I don't recommend. But for fun, just to do a test, you could put a meter in there. It would be a small rise because it's actually absorbing that. It's pretty crazy.
That's amazing. Wow. So yeah, my mind's still blown with the styrene part. And I looked up the EPA. It says central nervous system effects, peripheral neuropathy, reproductive issues, increased risk of leukemia, and that's what's in my growing dome. But it was the underground, but still. I mean, from the first time I saw that stuff like 3 years ago, the traditional ICF. Yeah. I just knew intuitively, I'm like, that doesn't look good. It doesn't look like it's going to last forever too. So
they will last a long time. And that was where I was kind of like really sold on it because I'm like, oh, here's an airtight building. It's concrete. It's mold resistant. Now, however, you really kind of picked up something, Matt, that, well, it's foam. It's not breathable. So what if moisture got between the concrete core and the block itself, right? Now, it's going to need air to create mold. However, once that moisture is in that concrete, it has nowhere to go. It's trapped, you know?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was
So,
good that you brought that up.
yeah, that's not good. What do you, so back to the mold piece, because I was actually talking to my friend Jared about this on the phone this morning, and uh, we're still burning wood in our wood stove, and
Mm-hmm.
he brought in a bunch of wood with like white mold on it, and he had to get it out of his house because as soon it was just off gassing. I think the spores were being released as it
Oh
was
yeah,
like heating
for
up in
sure.
his cabin.
Yep.
And some people are more sensitive to that, and he happened to be a machine operator for 30 plus years, and I've I don't know your thoughts on spectrophotometry and the Oligo scan. I think it's legit. And I tested him and just off the charts metals, like one of the worst
Yep.
tests I've ever seen. And I think obviously he's in his 50s, so the older you are, the accumulation is more. But especially people like yourself, like you said, renovating, machine operators, building parking lots. I mean, just around a lot of materials, you just absorb all that stuff, and then you get hypersensitive to things like mold, I would imagine, right? If you're full of heavy metals and
It's that toxic barrel effect, right? You know,
Mhm.
you're full of like. Fortunately, I didn't have heavy metals in all my testing, but I did have a lot of mold, and I had my toxicity was just through the roof. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's what I was doing. I was just filling up that barrel, right?
Yeah.
Living in a house, I'm sure there was all kinds of faulty wiring creating magnetic fields, and that was kind of like before I pretty much woke up once everything started going wireless. I'm like, yeah, from an EMF perspective, this isn't good. We need to minimize this. But, so it's just filling that barrel, right? And then now all of a sudden you just pushed it over to the edge. Now you're sensitive. Now you're mold sensitive. Now you're sensitive to the smallest amount of particles that are floating around that you're inhaling, that you're breathing, creating this inflammation. What else? I mean, it just now you're very sensitive to chemicals and
Mhm.
smells. Multiple chemical sensitivities, right? Just all these things to start stacking on top of one another. You know,
What are some of the things you did to get rid of your brain fog? Because I'm a big fan of ozone therapy, and I think the heavy hitter, someone's dealing with like mold or gut problems, I usually just go to the rectal ozone, and I'm like, it's not fun using a catheter, but it's a lot quicker than a coffee enema. We're talking about 10-15 minutes versus a half hour from my personal experience. And you can just bubble ozone in water, and O3 is amazing. In
I
terms,
went I went nuts with ozone. Um, thanks to Todd, actually, our
oh,
good friend
cool.
Todd. He had connections in that world, and he was really going deep into it. It was around that time too, because again, working with a good functional medicine doctor that understands the benefits of ozone. That's interesting. You brought that up because that's exactly kind of like the number one modality that I went to just from an initial, without getting in deep into the detox protocols. Ozone was actually one of the first ones, helped tremendously. That and this is just me. We're all different here, not that we're talking about nutrition. However, I was, believe it or not, because I was this athlete and I'm like eating all kinds of carbs, even though it was clean, not so much processed food. I was always a clean eater, but I was just so reliant on carbohydrates as a fuel source, right? So you can just imagine that. So believe it or not, a ketogenic diet and intermittent fasting was so challenging to do. But between that and ozone, that's where I had the turnaround. That's what changed my life was the nutrient. Believe it or not, I was always big into supplementations and minerals and everything that you promote. I was spot on. But definitely, yeah, that's what worked for me to
That's
help.
awesome. Yeah, I still do the exogenous ketones,
Oh
and
yeah,
for
love
some of the
them.
research on it, it's amazing. Like if you have the money, you can kind of cheat basically, and it doesn't matter. You're still getting the benefits of ketones and the
Yep,
same health effects. There's
yep.
a really interesting study I
The
read on that.
fasting in a
Yep.
bottle.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep. Yeah, for brain fog, I'm sure the ketones plus ozone probably just like lighting up a light bulb. It's amazing. So
It's what helped me really get clear on because I was running several companies. I had a couple companies. I mean, we were rocking. I had I had a 4-person crew. That's all we needed, but it was enough to run a couple companies, and we were doing very well. I was doing a lot of. It's so funny, because my background. That's how I can speak to this. I understand it. I was in the trenches, being exposed to it, but we were doing chemical containment was one of the things that I specialized in, because so I went from building and then I go more into concrete and then I went into like epoxies and chemical containments and coatings and waterproofing systems, a lot of below grade things. And that's where I had the exposure from. Um, and so again, once I cleared up that brain fog and I thought, oh, what am I bringing to the world here? I've got to take all this talent and all this knowledge, get back to the building, and then really study this and understand. Just like all the research and study that you do, I was doing it on a vast scale for construction because I really wanted to. I just don't want to be like, hey, this is my method, and hey, maybe it might work for some, maybe it won't work for. I'm like, this has to be foolproof. What I'm delivering today with you, like this is backed. This is science based. It's so it took a long time before I really launched it, to really get this clear.
Do you do home consulting? Because I'd imagine a lot of people are either renting or they're just stuck in their current situation because of work or they don't have the money to build a new house or whatever. Do you ever do like consulting for people that just want to make their home healthier as it is?
I just so everybody knows clearly, absolutely. That's one of the big things that I do. I travel all over the country. It's basically I do home inspections, but on steroids. Like you know, it's beyond a home inspection. Home inspection, I just kind of look at it as more of kind of a transactional piece to just to kind of make sure legality wise, everybody's protected through a transaction, right? And so there's a lot of oversight, a lot of things that are missed. And they're not looking at, the average home inspection is not looking at it from a healthy home perspective. Like, I come in and they're like, what are you even talking about? Like, because again, we're looking at, water quality, air quality, the mechanics of the home, right? The wiring, all of the EMF perspectives of the home. Again, the performance, the belts and the suspenders, from the roof, the crawl space to the walls, the windows, the foundations, understanding the external environmental impact. Hey, like, is it a combination? Are we being exposed from stuff that's external? Or are we being exposed from everything that's internally, right? And so that's what I do in these inspections. And I put together a report and recommendations for the clients to have. So they're, and it's kind of a good, I give these ideas kind of a good, better, or best kind of a scenario. Like, okay, what can I do in the short term? Okay, here's the simple things you can do. But if you want to get into a renovation, then here's the big list, the master list of things that you can do. But it goes beyond that too, through my assessments is also offering consulting. So I work again, and we'll talk about this too. So I have the background, been doing this for a long time, in the building industry, now very well versed in the healthy building industry. But I'm only one person, right? And there's not a lot of people that think like me, and there's not very many contractors. There's good contractors out there doing great performance building, no doubt. Sorry about that. But am I still back on here? Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
But I work really well with contractors because I can take all of this knowledge, because this is nothing esoteric. This is nothing woo-woo. These are methods, these are materials, these are designs, these are specifications that are very practical and mainstream that we can get access to. And so I do a really good job of delivering, given the deliverables to the client and the general contractor. So we will always work with the general contractor, and then I manage the scope and I give the contractor that support and educate not only the contractor, but all the trades that trickle down through that field. And so what I do is I offer project management beyond the assessment. If the client decides, hey, let's go for a full renovation, and also too, even for new build construction. So if somebody's in the pre-design work, and hopefully our your audience finds this video before they find the architect, because or right at the beginning state, because then I can come in and incorporate all of these designs and these specifications for everything. I know we haven't really got it, we've kind of been bouncing around, but we're talking again, the water, the lighting, the electrical infrastructure, which goes that's a pretty deep topic in itself. The building, again, non-toxic building materials, um, climate,
Can we
ventilation
get in? Do you want
control.
to dive into each of those for a little bit?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
I'm really curious your thoughts, and I could share a little bit of mine. Like lighting, that's one of the most fascinating to me because it seems like one of the easiest, except the recessed lights. So this this kit home I got from
yeah,
Pennsylvania, Zoot
yeah.
cabin, great quality. You can't even tell that it's a two-piece home that was dozered up my
That's
driveway in the
beautiful.
middle of
Yeah,
winter.
it's nice.
But a lot of the recessed lighting I don't use because it's just very cool light, very, I forget the Kelvin, but it's just ridiculous. It's
Yeah.
like noonday sun. And so I just flip them on and off really quickly. But if they're screw-in
Hopefully not at
lights,
night, right?
yeah, if at night I don't really, I
Or
don't worry
yeah.
about it. I take melatonin anyway, but but
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, focus on the supplement.
yeah, but ideally you would switch them out, and I like the color changing ones, for an Adam that sells some, but
Mhm.
I put in, so I come from an off-grid history where I was 100% off-grid for most of the last 4 years, and I'm looking to get back to semi off-grid, or at least a massive backup system.
Mhm.
But I was using LED screw-in lights, right? And for power savings. And so orange
Mhm.
bulbs, yellow bulbs, red bulbs, mostly orange, I like.
Right.
But in this home, I switched over to Edison lights. Hudson Co. is the company.
Incandescent.
Incandescent, like, yeah, the ones, and game changer. I mean, 60 watts each. Not off grid friendly if you have a huge place, but if you're on grid, I just feel so much calmer even at night using them. Um,
Mhm.
and now I'm playing around with LED strips, which I'm going to put around like
Okay.
ambient red, which I already have in my kitchen. So it kind of just shoots up.
Do some indirect lighting. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really bright at night. If I just have it all red in my kitchen, I don't need the incandescent on at all. But that's probably where I'm going to go in the bunker, is because I'm going to have no holes in the ceiling really. So I'm probably going to do LED
Hmm.
strips and incandescent, because lighting in the bunker is probably more important than a normal home with the lack of light. So
Well, maybe I can maybe I could change your idea around like
I'm open to it.
incandescent in the
Yeah.
audience here too. And
Yeah.
again, um, we've come a long ways, in the last 100 years, since the Edison light bulb, right? And it was definitely no question a rough transition going to LED. Absolutely beyond a doubt, no question. But hey, at least we got rid of fluorescent, with switch mode power supply. That was the worst, the CFL bulbs and stuff. Those were so bad. But LED definitely, when it really kind of launched out, it was more of the commercial sector and like design, like in libraries, in art galleries, in these luxury homes where designers and architects, they'd bring in a lighting designer, and a lighting designer would pick certain temperatures of lights for certain things, for very specific reasons for artwork, right?
Yeah.
Which they needed to meet what's called high like a CRI, which is color rendering index. And basically, the higher the value, basically is means that it's more closer to the natural light, right? That of the sun. So the higher the CRI rating, the more the closer you're bringing to natural light. Okay, but and this is the part that I know you love, and it's breaking everything down again. Everything's frequency, energy, all these different types of things, EMFs, everything's on this electromagnetic frequency scale, which is light, which is part of that scale, right? And when we're measuring these electrical or these light frequencies, it's measured, we can break it down to nanometers, right? Nanometers, the lower the nanometers, the cooler, the higher the nanometer. Eventually it goes from red, orange to red to like an invisible, near infrared, right? And so that's the key focus right there, is to understand the nanometer wavelength of what a light is putting out. Okay. And then of course the temperature, right? All the way from, say, high noon, depending on your geographic area, it could be as high as 10,000, Kelvin K, to sunset is like 1800 to 1600 K. So temperature. So we're dealing with nanometers and we're dealing with temperature. And so as the LED industry evolved from a high end standpoint with these higher CRI index ratings, well, then in that market, from a wellness application, they started looking at the LEDs, and these manufacturers started looking at this for wellness applications. Believe it or not, this goes back, see, when did, I'm going to say it was probably around 2010, that they started looking at and doing all these studies, hiring these circadian biologists to understand, right? So that part of the industry really started putting it together, as far as, okay, selecting the right nanometers, which again, it was more, not that they were looking at nanometers, but they were looking at, okay, hey, we need circadian applications for wellness, for, nursing homes, or, whatever, convalescent hospitals, things like that. Right. And hospitals as well. And so now, as it's really progressed, I work with one company called Colorbeam, and Colorbeam, Canadian-based company, and Colorbeam they came from the audio visual realm, and when they developed their company, they knew that they wanted to get into the wellness application, but they were just looking at it from a circadian rhythm standpoint. And so they actually hired a circadian biologist to actually help them come up with these combinations and these formulas to actually create a chipset in the actual LED itself of what would create the proper nanometers and the temperatures. But what was really cool with what they did too, you're going to like this, from a DE standpoint or an EMF standpoint. When I say EMFs, there's multiple forms of EMFs, and we'll go back into that later. But they were like, well, since we're low voltage guys, there's no reason why we can't take the light engines, the actual, the bulb itself, right? And that's powered off of Cat6 low voltage cable. Like, there's no reason why we can't power the light with this on a low voltage 48 volt system. So not only there, but they also said, well, let's clean up our AC adapters, because you got to bring your 110 in, which converts to your 48 volts going out, right? Well, what they did is they put a super clean, they put a super clean power adapter in there, so it's not putting out dirty electricity. And then it goes through a DMX controller, which decouples any line noise of anything onto that Cat6 cable, which now feeds all your daisy chains, all your lights together. Also, too, is their all the switches, the dimmers, and things like that. Now it's all on a low voltage. So here's the beauty about this. They're unique. Not a lot of people understand, or manufacturers even did this for this reason. They went 100% hardwired, non-wireless. They used all clean power supplies because they couldn't have interference from audio. That was why they did that, right? They kept it on a low voltage infrastructure, so it reduced any electrical field. And then their light in itself had this full tunability range from 1800K to like 6000K, from 450 nanometers all the way to 800 nanometers, all these different types of things, so they could meet the circadian application, right? I still like the idea of incandescent, but you can take an incandescent and put a dimmer on there, which, by the way, for our audience here, dimmers are a big culprit for dirty electricity. just how the rheostat and how it works, right? And how it dims.
Mhm.
But you could put an Edison bulb on a dimmer and you're going to get a flickering Edison bulb, and you're going to be putting DE into the line. So if you already use the Edison bulbs, put it on an on and off switch. There's another company I've been playing around with. Again, these are just simple things that we can do in our homes. The company Blue Blocker. I don't know if you've played around with their lights at all.
No, I have. Well, I'm on the Color Beam site, and I'm gonna have to check it out because I noticed they have LED tracks, and RGB is what I did, and I didn't
Yeah.
go with the cheap. I went with a pretty good independently. I forget how it's phrased, but independently controlled, where basically the whole strip can be, each LED can be a different light if you
Yep.
want. So you can do like crazy patterns. Most cheap
Yep.
LED strips, it's just all one color. Like if you get from
Oh yeah.
Walmart, right? You just hit a
Yep.
button and red or blue or whatever. So I'm
Yep.
going to do it in my growing dome too, to make like a light
Yes.
show from the outside going up,
Yeah.
which is cool. And just kind of going back to the CRI, what's interesting is the Hudson have a CRI of 100, and the circadian LEDs I was using were 84, but 7 watts for 60 watts. So I don't
Yeah.
know how many people are off grid, but I mean, I just tell people too to go by how they feel. I do like that you're pro LED because in the health space, it gets so demonized. I've seen the last
Oh, it's
few
yeah.
years to where,
Yeah.
it's the incandescent people, biohackers have been saying that for years, right? And I just resisted it and was like, LEDs are fine. And I feel like it's kind of like an individual. I can say I definitely feel better with the incandescents, and I mean,
Yep.
even better with the LED strips. That's generally what I do at night. I keep it pretty dim and just have very, very dim incandescent light in the background usually.
So the RGB, and I'm going to add W
Mm.
and another W. So color beam, again, other manufacturers too, but really, I really brought in the science behind LEDs
Mm.
just to kind of share with everybody. And I'm happy for people to challenge me and have a conversation around it, because everything I just talked about is the science. It's manufactured specifically for these reasons. Okay. Now, RGBWs, red, green, blue, and then white and white. So what you need is for tunability to have this full spectrum of all of the colors, right? We bring in the white. So now you're using white to saturate.
Mm.
So now you can take each one of those colors and you can bring white into and to create that saturation and that difference. So you can custom tune every color. I mean, it's unlimited, really. It's thousands of colors, really. But what the extra W is, now that's a wellness application. So it's a white. So with that additional white, now you've taken your RGBW and you've turned it into kind of a circadian kind of an application, if you will, because now from a temperature standpoint, you can get in those studied scientific ranges between, I think it's 2000 to like 5000 K Kelvin is like where the optimal for melatonin, serotonin, and all these types of things, right? And so you can actually now use that RGBW. Yeah, they make different tracks, and you can create coves. You can put them high, you can put them low, you can put them in the middle of the walls, you can put the tracks in the drywall. You can kind of play around with different colors. It's unlimited. So once you dial in, like I did with Color Beam, once you dial in with a good lighting manufacturer that's putting out, again, all of the proven things that we're talking about here, right? As far as like the circadian application, the high CRI application, a tunability application, RGBW application, it's unlimited on what you can do from a health perspective for lighting. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And then they also do, of course, you could incorporate you're sorry, man. I get excited about the lighting aspect, but when you're bringing in like the Edison bulbs, I like everything to be I like the low voltage infrastructure because now I'm creating a low EMF environment just by the lighting in itself. Okay. Yeah. Because all the switches, but everything's like integrated, right? So then like all my downlight, I'll use just like a 3-inch, a small light engine, and I'll use that as my warm to dim for that light that you're talking about. Then what I'll do is I'll do more of a tape light indirectly, strategically. Maybe it's in a cove, maybe it's in a cabinet, maybe it's in a toe kick. And then you could kind of just use that as your accent lighting. And then you could dim the ambient lighting, which would be your functional lighting, right? And then you could really start to bring in that indirect lighting for more kind of that mood, that calm, that chill kind of a setting for whatever you're trying to create.
That's awesome. Well, on the flicker, I've heard that the iPhone slow motion camera is not sensitive enough to pick up the flicker rate. Have you heard that, or what are your thoughts on? Because usually, they say, oh, just put your iPhone on slow motion camera and hold it up to the bulb, and you could tell.
Yeah, it just depends what frequency, whatever kind of a driver system, is being used. I know that plays a role in it. I know the phone does pick up, certain frame rates of certain frequencies. The higher the frequency, the harder it is for the phone to pick it up. So there can be frequencies that are actually creating a flicker that you can't see on an iPhone. That is correct. Yeah, you wouldn't know. The only way that you would be able to test that, and this is what I do. I'm a geek about equipment and meters and all that kind of stuff, right? But I use a photo spectrometer, and a photo spectrometer will be able to pick up. It'll break it down into hertz of flicker rate. So that way what kind of what the hertz is, what the system is, what the infrastructure is, and what it's putting out. And I'm talking more LED. So that you need a photospectrometer to pick that up. It'll measure your temperatures. It'll measure your flicker rate. It'll measure the nanometers. It's pretty cool what some of these photospectrometers do.
Yeah, I have the Hopo color. I've had that for a few years, and it's great just to see the color temperature of the incandescent's amazing. There's barely any blue or green.
Yeah, there's
a huge
no
spike
blue.
in red.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that they do for sure. And then, the genius part about it, right? It's like, okay, you want brighter light, you just switch to a 100-watt bulb.
But you're saying if people have the incandescent, take the dimmer, switch the dimmer switch out, right, and just put it on off.
The dimmer is going to put DE into the line, which DE is harmonics, line noise, and it couples onto the wiring throughout the whole entire home. And we'll get into DE further too here in our conversation.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to get into that now? Because it's a good segue to EMF with the lighting, and
perfect.
I mean, lighting is a form of electromagnetism, right? So
yes,
yeah, that's one thing that I've been delving. I'm actually going to interview Static Shield next week, the founder, and I've had a few shows on dirty electricity, and it's a deep topic, and one that it's funny because I've had people challenge me. This one lady on Instagram, she just kept messaging me nonstop. She's like, you have to talk to my husband. He's an electrical engineer. Dirty electricity is a conspiracy. It's BS. It's a hoax. They just want to sell filters. It's a ripoff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I'm texting Brian Hoyer, and he's like, no, diabetics require less insulin with dirty electricity filters. It's not just one study.
Yeah.
There's several studies on it, right?
Yeah.
It's legit. Yeah. It's not something you have to believe in. It's real.
No, I mean, it's harmonics. It's just line noise. That's what's funny. There's no conspiracy theory here. This is fact. So in the audio visual world, like I said, Color Beam, I'm just using them for an example, and we're going to get into this now. They selected the power supplies that didn't put DE because they couldn't have interference in the audio systems, creating these home theater systems, these recording studios. You work with any contractor that builds these types of facilities for these specific applications, they use these this type of technology so they don't have what's referred to as EMI or MEP or DE. There's no conspiracy theory about it. They're using it because they can't have the line noise. But what the line noise does by default from a health perspective is exactly like what you shared with what Brian Hoyer shared, and all the study and all the research, and people that are very sensitive can actually hear the audible noise.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the way I describe it to people is it's radiating off the wiring in the walls into the center of the room, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
an audible. It's moving through the airwaves. It's coming off the line through the home. And
Yeah.
it's usually more sensitive people that has kind of that direct effect. But again, everything that we're having in this conversation, even though if you're super healthy and you're doing all of your supplements and you feel fine in that area, well, it's still happening. It's still happening in the background of that, again, like the flickering light, right? If we can't see it, or even the phone can't pick it up, like if it's flickering, it's having some kind of a stressor, right? If you have, air conditioning units that are just driving massive amounts of airflow and you can hear them like a turbine, that has an effect on the central nervous system. The DE has a direct effect on that central nervous system. Again, whether you're healthy or not, or have any sensitivities, no doubt.
I think we spoke on the phone. I played around with the whole house uh, DE filter, and I had it on my off-grid lake house as well. It's still on there. And I mean, I guess I'm opening up a whole new, Pandora's box here. But the difference between being on an off-grid disconnected inverter solar system, battery system versus on the grid, totally different solutions, right? And then you throw in the mix a variable speed well pump, right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
different, but I
Pool
just noticed,
pumps.
yeah, but with the whole house thing, it it's tricky, right? Because one, I know Static Shield has a couple models, and like
Yeah.
one is better
Yep.
for inverters, and
Yep.
another is better without inverters, meaning on grid.
Yep.
Uh, so
Yeah,
yeah,
they have three different, like they have a standard duty, a heavy duty, and an ultra duty or something like that.
yeah,
And the way that they're designed, I static is one of the best, by the way. Like even in
cool.
the building biology world, they've tested, and the nice thing about building biology is there's a lot of engineers that that are on the board, or work with the building biology. And these engineers, they're just, everybody wants to geek out. And so they're taking all these different, green wave filters or capacitance filters, or, different ways in series or parallel. And then they're using like the static filters and all these different types of filters, right? And they're actually measuring from from a low frequency to a high frequency. And they're measuring that interference, right? And then they're switching on and off, and they're capturing all these measurements. And static, they're depending on, again, the configuration of the wiring system, right? They'll, again, that's where you bring in like their different duty. That's why they just
Mhm.
made it simple, depending on, for the average contractor, just to install one of their filters onto like a main panel.
Mhm.
But they've tested out, it's one of the cleanest, let me rephrase that. It's the filter that actually reduces the most amount of line noise.
Wow. But talking to Brian, usually people still need, like, I guess Mercola was one of these cases where Mercola had like 60 filters or 80, something crazy in his mansion plugged in.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
with the
yeah.
whole house, he could reduce it to 20, but it was still 20. It was still a lot. Have you heard that where
Well,
people still need individual?
20
I mean,
millivolts.
oh no, sorry, individual little single filters at the outlet with the whole house. So like the whole house is not a complete
No, no,
replacement.
absolutely. You're
Okay.
100% right.
Okay.
So we can, okay, let me phrase this. Okay, like, so say for example, we'll just say you have an inverter that's kind of more of an outside influence coming into the main panel or feeding from the main panel, which you have a solar, you have generator going into that, right? So that's potentially, and we'll talk about that potentially can put out a high amount of DE, right? So we're trying to point source, isolate that, and clean that up at source, right? Um, and then, so say for example, we do all of this great, heavy duty static filters in the panel. We've isolated the inverters. We've done all that. Well, now we're going to bring in all the technology into the house, right? We're going to bring in
Mhm.
all the HVAC systems, um, VRF type systems,
Hot tub.
ECM drives, hot tubs, pool pumps,
Yeah.
all these different motors and things like that. And then it's hard for, if the electrician doesn't know, he's just going to be stacking breakers all in one panel and just wiring everything together. And the filters, kind of doing a good job of filtering out certain things, but it's going to miss other parts as well. To where I always try to, because I know we're going to bring the technology. I mean, we'll have a conversation, but like routers, wireless routers, all the different technologies and power supplies and adapters. I mean, those put out DE, and some of them can put out a lot. And so what I try to do is when we're designing a home, knowing that there's going to be technology, is one is we'll try to have multiple panels. So we'll have the main panel, we'll do sub panels, and then we'll tie filters into each panel, and we'll try to isolate where the main culprits, knowing that an ECM drive motor for a variable speed HVAC system, or a variable drive motor for your pool pump, we'll try to put those specifically on panels that we're filtering that out. But the last line of defense, exactly what you just said, would be like, I like the green wave filters personally. I just like them. They seem to be a little bit, they just seem to reduce a little bit more. And I like that they have an external plug too. But yeah, sometimes you do have to, say somebody comes in, hey, I like this router, I'm going to put this router in, then you could just put a, filter at point source.
Yeah. So you're saying, just to make sure I have it right, if you know the problem sources, whether it's maybe say a well and a hot tub, you would put that on the same panels that you could just have all the problems on one panel, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And filter it, like with a static filter at that panel.
I see.
Okay. But of course, it's not going to eliminate then if we start plugging all this technology in and all these other things. And then that's when your point source, little green wave filters. But you can, you're not putting 100 of them through your you're literally strategically placing these at the point of source of where it's coming from. Typically that's done after the fact. So you build your home, you do all these things, then you have somebody like me or Brian or, to come in there and bring in the meters and, kind of point source where that dirty electricity is coming from.
Awesome. So yeah, with EMFs, I know you work with shielding. I think we spoke about that on the phone, like shielding the wall. I think I saw a story last week where you posted on with Y Shield, which I've used, and I actually I had a sensory deprivation float room at my off-grid house, and I probably didn't do it right. I felt anxiety in that room. Maybe it's because I was just disconnected, but it was the Y Shield. It was all grounded. I mean, I wasn't watching the contractors doing it, but I told them definitely ground each wall and or at least ground one wall, I think. So maybe that was the issue, but it was basically ceiling, 4 walls painted with is it
and the
graphite?
Ceiling. And the ceiling is so that five surfaces. Of course, they all want to be grounded together, right, through one grounding strap or depending on the configuration.
I believe 2 coats, and I think Brian, like I've been to his house up here. He lives close to me, and his philosophy is fully shield the bedroom, especially if you're in a city urban area. But his living room, he only partially shielded, where he can still get Wi-Fi, and people aren't going to be sleeping in there generally.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a good strategy to kind of shield by, make the bedroom a fortress, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. But even better though, I just want to really ingrain this for our audience and our contractors. Hardwire, man, let's get back to the hardwire infrastructure. Bring in your Cat 6, bring in your Cat 7. We are in a time now in the electrical world where the low voltage is now really bleeding heavily into the electrical infrastructure. And, a lot of IT guys that are very advanced, that understand electrical, they're definitely going to be a little bit ahead of the curve versus somebody in the electrical field that hasn't got into the low voltage world. I think you're going to be behind because now we're getting into, power management systems that are all, yes, it's 110 coming in or 220 or, whatever type of power is coming in. But now we're starting to branch into controlling everything through like cat Ethernet cables. Okay. And so that said, it's kind of getting back to the 2000s, when we were still in the infamous stage of, DSL and, what were we doing? We were hardwiring everything, with Ethernet cables for home automation and security systems, and we needed faster speeds, right? So wireless, when that first started coming out, just didn't support that, right? And it hasn't been that long, but it's like we really started getting away from that, going to all these wireless technologies. And I'll circle back on your question, but number one, hands down, as a contractor, build your home with the environment that everything is 100% hardwired using like Ethernet cable and an Ethernet infrastructure on the low voltage side, because then now you could tie in your routers, you can tie in your security systems, you can tie everything that operates, 365, all the time. If there was ever anything was to go down, you still have that, or you're not relying on a wireless technology. Okay. Now I'm big. I like my convenience. Okay. I'd be lying here if I said that I'm 100%, hardwired, because I use, routers as well, but we'll use more like beaming technology routers, or even like kind of Starlink. And I know everyone's talking about Starlink, and you can wire it to be a lower EMF, exposure. I think you and I had a short discussion on that, but because once we convert that into that Ethernet, or into a router, not so much. I would not recommend the Starlink router, man. It not only puts out a lot of DE. Sorry, Tesla, but I mean it. Not to bag on that, but it puts out a real high signal. And so they make now a bypass to where you can bring in another router. And again, everybody, you could use this for different configurations. It doesn't have to be Starlink, but you can use like beaming routers. You can use lower emission routers, throughout the house, and that you could just put on a kill switch. And so at least, during your convenience of, the day, and you're like, yeah, it's fine. I want to be wireless. I don't want to be hardwired all the time. Well, then, hey, then at your discretion, you can turn that power off and on anytime that you want. And then back to your original question, excuse me, on the, the graphite coatings and the shieldings and things like that. You can you could do your bedroom. You could do, I like solid core doors. I try to get the best seal I can. And so that way, if you're sleeping and then, say you have company and people are out in a common area, and you are, again, on this lower emission kind of a wireless router type system, you're definitely going to be shielded in that room. It's not going to be 100%. It's not going to be perfect, but we're talking low level signals. And by the way, too, I've measured the, using spectrum analyzers on, because I had to learn myself. So I've built a couple homes where we did all graphite coating on the inside, and I was doing it for multiple reasons. I was doing it from an RF perspective, but I was also doing it to reduce the electrical field from Romex in the wall, which it helps. It actually, you get a reduction in that. You virtually pick up like no electrical field, but if there was an AC magnetic issue, if there was some kind of a wiring problem, it's not going to block AC magnetics, just super clear, so everybody understands that. But it does a great job of blocking RF, and it helps block electrical fields. But it also too, so here I put this high powered router, did different tests, and believe it or not, the signal strength, people are like, hey, you're creating a microwave here, right? It's hitting, it's reflecting, it's bouncing off the walls. Now you've created a higher signal in that area, but I've measured it, and I don't get a higher signal. You'll get a consistent signal, because the router's, constantly not pinging all however the router system, don't hold me to that. I'm not the engineer, but it's more like kind of consistent. Okay. And steady. And then if you were to literally go from one room that, again, say it has the shielded coating, to the next room, there's virtually there's no, your phone will actually still work, or whatever device will actually still connect. But if you were to go in your room, or a room that's isolated from that, it just keeps dropping the signal, further and further and further down the line. So it does not, I haven't experienced the way that I've done it, have not experienced that I'm creating this Faraday cage that's blocking all of the frequencies to bombarding my frequencies in that room, which is a little bit counterintuitive anyways. Obviously, somebody's going to go through all that work to do that. They're not going to sit there and blaze, all these wireless devices within that room. So
Another, you mentioned that it reduces the electric field from the Romex. Using metal conduit helps too, right?
oh man, that is the gold standard. So MC cable, but it's pretty pricey. Metal conduit with metal boxes properly grounded, and twisting your common and your hot wire. If you twist those wires and you feed that through, even if you feed it through, PVC Schedule 40, if you wrap those, because the way that you wrap that wire, it actually cancels out any kind of a field. Just know that too. So somebody's on a budget and you're like, hey, I can't afford metal conduit or don't want to use, but the big piece is you get to ground your metal box. The metal conduit's grounded to the metal box and it's grounded to the electrical grounding system. Okay, so that's just as effective as an MC cable, and it's cheaper than MC cable. So yeah, 100%. And also too, it suppresses AC magnetic and it suppresses DE through the line. So it's a good wiring practice.
That's awesome. I'm sure a lot of people with this conversation, I think smart meters was one of the first things that was talked about, and it gets really crazy with talking about like remote detonating them and stuff, and you can get into wild things to start fires, and who knows what they're doing in big cities. But unfortunately, the guest cabin that hopefully will be finished in the next couple of weeks, it just needs water, or next month. It's a little tiny guest cabin. When it got power, they put the smart meter right on the bedroom. I mean, it's a tiny bed. It's a tiny cabin, like a tiny house, but it's right where the bed's going to be. And so I'm going to have them move it. We just have to trench another line and put it on a pole. But it's my understanding, it's the magnetic field that they create that's a problem.
Yep.
And there are all these little mesh guards, which I was using back in 2010, and little aluminum
for the meter.
Yeah, and I think it's really something where, I mean, you would have to block the magnetic field, which would take a pretty thick, expensive material, right?
Like a mu metal. It's like basically lead, type metals and things like that. So, man, for one, distance yourself from the source. Right. And so that's just a good practice of what we want to have. You don't want your electrical panel, because the main culprit of that is by default of the different phases of power, the different legs of power coming into that panel are sometimes the way that they're configured. And again, so understanding AC magnetics is you have a hot, you have your neutral. So you got power coming in and it creates a field, and then you got it going out the opposite direction, creating a field. The two fields mix, and then it creates this magnetic field, right? And so when you have a lot of power coming through those legs in a panel, there's the spacing on them when they come in has an effect, and it can actually put out. Some panels put out very low. You can measure 12 inches away and it drops exponentially to even like a safe level. But some panels, you can pick it up about 4 feet away. So like you just don't know, depending on, electricians wouldn't even know this, right? But like, there's different Siemens panels that actually have a good configuration.
I've used that one.
It's so weird. Just they don't look at it from how we look at it. We're looking at, hey, we want to cancel out all the magnetic, issues and things like that. But as a good rule of thumb, the panel should always be away from any kind of a sleeping area. And you brought up two topics. So one is you're putting out, there's definitely going to be an AC magnetic field coming from that panel. We just don't know the amount of it. And if it is with a sleeping area behind the panel, one resolution could have been, maybe putting that shielding, that move shield, or this lead types of shielding. There's different, several manufacturers, offer these shielding, and you could put that and it'll block that AC magnetic or reduce it, to make it safe. but then the meter, that's an RF, so that's an, it's an RF device and it's pinging, right? It's always looking for a signal. Um,
It's
and
what's funny is people say just opt for analog. It's actually not available in North Idaho. Funny. They
yeah,
don't know because
yeah,
I think because I'm so rural that they're
yeah.
like, we don't want to drive
They're not
up.
going out there.
Yeah, yeah. Which is
Yeah,
wild because that's a lot of people's solution. They're like, it's easy, just opt out. I'm like, a lot of people, I think they're making it
yeah.
illegal or pretty much in a lot of areas.
I've done hundreds of inspections and then I measure the RF, the radio frequencies. And, again, we're looking for the external, then we'll go to the internal. So I'll make sure, all the routers, any wireless devices, Bluetooth devices are powered off on the inside. I want to get my baseline outside, see where it's coming from, measure the pinging source, whether it's 20-second intervals coming from that meter itself, right?
Mm.
And then I'll go through the home and then I'll measure like different points of the home. Hey, is in fact that having any kind of an influence on the home, and if somebody's just concerned, I just put a Faraday cage, over it. And typically it's now, if you're living in an apartment and you happen to be the lucky one that has a bank of like 20, yeah, definitely. Then what do you do? Then you're probably going to have to get into like either it's a rental, so you're not going to want to put a lot of money into it. So then you would probably need to not only do the shielding from the AC magnetic side, you'd have to measure it, but you would have to do, either you could do your graphite coatings or you could do a bed canopy, to protect yourself because there's nothing you can do in that kind of an environment.
Yeah. So many let me know if you're still okay on time. So many
Yeah,
questions that
I'm
come up.
good. I'm
Like
just getting warmed up, Matt.
awesome. Awesome. Shielded clothing, because this is something that I sat down with Brian years ago, and it's a interesting topic because there's all these companies now.
Yeah.
Obviously there's grounding sheets, which I sell, which is a silver threads on cotton.
I'd like to talk
But
about that too.
absolutely, yeah, add that to the list. But shielded clothing, I met with Brian. I think it might have been our first meeting, hanging out, having a burger, and the silver was touching my skin. And so I had a conductive material touching another conductive material. And he said there could be harmonics that are created from the signal hitting the silver clothing that then enters my body. And, so, and I was wearing silver underwear. I had the baseball caps. I mean, I'm talking 3 or 4 different brands over the
Yeah.
last 4 or 5 years.
Right. Yeah.
And so now there's a company I have on my website, which it's like, which is really cool just for safety. It's wallets and basically RFID blocking. I mean, I don't internationally travel on the home body, but so people can't scan and steal your stuff. So it's like
Oh,
Faraday
yeah.
bags and stuff like that, which is
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah.
But they also just came out with like a jacket and pants that are silver. But what's cool is living in the north, usually I have multiple layers on. So if I have a base layer and then that, it's my skin's insulated from the silver. But
Right.
just curious your thoughts on that. I just flew, I just down to SoCal and I wore the jacket on the plane just to see if I felt anything, and could have been placebo, but I definitely felt calmer,
Yeah.
protecting my internal organs from the RF hit. Right. I mean, you're flying in a metal tube. It's a little harsh.
Yes.
So.
You're high altitudes, right? There's turbulence, there's friction. Um, you're just being bombarded by all these radio waves. It's a very high positive ionic, chamber, right? It's definitely a blast, and it impacts me. It has an effect on me, and I've played around with like all the different silver products and things like that, and that's probably out of many people that again, it's the minerals in the body, right? It's the supplementation.
Yep. Yep.
And it's kind of like where you're at, where that toxic barrel that we talked about is, like if you're pretty resilient, like for me personally, this is just my opinion around this. Like I don't really find a real benefit to the clothing. Again, this is just me, because maybe just the minerals and the supplementation helps in that standpoint. Not that something's not going on, but I just look at being in a fuselage of everything that we just talked about. It's going to have an impact. So for me, some silver clothing, it's like it's such a mute issue, to where I know that when I get off that plane, that I need to like ground,
Yep.
recenter, get into nature, at least the nice thing about San Diego is you had the ocean right there, right? So you
Yeah.
could just like just just flush out all that positive ion, right? Just really bring in that negative ion experience, So that's kind of where I'm at on that. Because I just understanding what all these shielding materials do, I'm not a again, using them for applications, again, talking about like the bedroom with the canopy, if you can't escape this and you're constantly being bombarded, right? Or the shielding materials for walls just to keep ourselves protected because we're trying to create a sleeping sanctuary, but as far as like the clothes and stuff go, I don't know. Like I'm not, I tried them. Some of them aren't breathable,
They get super hot, that's
they
for
get
sure.
hot. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Like yeah, I don't really have an opinion around it. On that.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. It's low priority, and maybe for someone
Yeah.
that's in a healing state and they're just super
Or that,
super
yeah.
hypersensitive, and it's just an extra tool they can
Yeah,
use.
or yeah, or like even babies,
Mhm.
I can get that, when we're developing this system and like you don't want to put a baby in this experience. So maybe, like beanie for the baby or a little
Yeah.
something like that, maybe,
Yeah.
but I talking about like, like your silver, like I'm really big into this. And matter of fact, I have a connection for you as well, of like another supplier, for like three-dimensional plated silver where each thread is three-dimensionally plated, because that's a big concern from a health
What does
perspective,
that mean?
the silver. So the way that they plate the silver, like so a lot of the Chinese imported products, the way that they plate the fabric, that silver wears off and then it
I
becomes
see.
airborne. Now you're inhaling heavy metals, right? So with like certain ones, like from Europe, like Swiss, Germany, they actually take like the threads and they actually three-dimensionally plate the threads, and
Wow.
it won't come off. You can wash it; it's not going to come off,
Wow.
and or if it gets coated with oils and things like that, it's going to lose that. So there's some manufacturers that I work with for home shielding. Like, so say for example, I'm kind of branching out here, but I'll keep it together. So sorry. But like these different fabrics that we're talking about, again, whether it's for grounding, whether it's for shielding, I'm going to talk about shielding for a second, because they can be used for both. But from a shielding, so we kind of passed, I won't go back into this, but like, say for example, somebody's doing a stick framed home. Talked about mass wall earlier, which mass wall, by the way, there was a benefit that I left out. Anything up to 12 inches, it's going to block that meter wavelength, whether it's a 5G or a 4G. It will not penetrate a 5-inch or a 12-inch block wall. And also, too, if you have a thermally sealed window, which, obviously in your area, if you're going to put new windows in, by default, you're going to have low E, windows. And just by having a low E window, you don't even need to plate it or protect it. Like these wavelengths won't penetrate windows. What they will penetrate is the frames. Sorry, kind of went off on that a little bit, but the reason I'm sharing that, so if you're doing a stick frame building, you're not going to block that. You're not going to block that outside influenced, uh, radio wave coming. It's going to come right through the wall. Right now, we talked about the shielding. Yes, you could do the shielding, but imagine building a new home and you're going to do the graphite shielding. It adds so many layers to the building product because now you have to do multiple coats of paint.
Yep.
You got to make sure it's grounded properly. There's just to do one-off room here and there. Totally get it. It has its place. But when you're designing a home, let's go beyond that. So we can use these fabrics in a stick framed home behind your siding or behind the drywall. And again, now we got to talk about permeability rates too, because some are not going to allow moisture. to bypass through. So you have to have the breathability, the permeability, like we talked about earlier. So some of these fabrics that we're talking about, and offline, we'll kind of share more information. But what we're doing is we're taking these fabrics and we're wrapping these wood constructed homes and the roofs and things like that. So that's a great shielding tool that you can use from a shielding perspective. Okay, and they make different gradients of softness. So if you want like a bed canopy, they make different ones, or they even like use more natural fabrics that aren't like silver, so it's not conductive or anything like that. Okay.
Are you a fan of grounding the floor if someone's building from scratch, like making the whole floor of the home grounded?
Yeah. Like, so yeah, we'll go right into perfect segue into grounding, which I'd really want to pick your brain on too. So definitely, concrete's grounding. But I kind of have my perspective and my takeaway working with different electrical engineers, and specifically in this field, is now when we're doing the grounding system to the electrical system, right? That's just grounding the electrical system, and now you're also influenced by a lot of different factors as well, right? So there could be the DE aspect, right? You're definitely there's gonna be some voltage transfer there. There's gonna be some dirtiness that's gonna couple into that, some nuisance, dirty power, that's going to couple onto that grounding system. Okay, and especially how that grounding system is connected into the UFA rod or the grounding system to that of the home, right? And this is good. And I've done a lot of testing with this, Matt. Like, I've tested these, like the sheets, these different grounding materials that we're talking about here. Even depending on the size of the ground wire, that you're plugging into the earth ground, in the outlet on the receptacle. Sometimes that actually feeds a high amount of voltage back into that ground line. So you could still take your tester and test it and make sure you got a good, proper grounding. There's no wiring errors and things like that, first and foremost, right? Before somebody's going to plug into the grounding. But some of these grounding systems, the way that the infrastructure is set up, you're actually feeding power, a little bit of line voltage back through that ground wire through that whole mat. Okay. So
what are your thoughts on
like
in a hotel? Years ago I used the green wave and I plugged into. I mean, this is like once a year. Or when I used to go to health conferences, I don't anymore. I would plug my grounding sheet into the green wave in the wall. Do you think that would do anything or help?
No, the green wave wouldn't really. I
don't know if it was placebo, but it felt better. I tried both.
Like it would. Okay, hold on. So, like obviously, you'd probably take your green wave meter just to see how many millivolts
that's what I did.
DE, right? And then obviously, probably more than likely, especially in a hotel room, because the commercial everything's grounded. Like the way they're done in a commercial level is pretty awesome. Right. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have DE, but obviously I would think that a green wave filter would reduce the DE. But were you kind of saying in conjunction with a grounding though? That was.
Yeah. The normal grounding products you have, just the really short that plugs into the third prong in the outlet. Yeah, and so instead of just going right in the outlet, I went in the green wave.
Through the green wave.
I don't know. I feel like it makes sense, but
I don't think it really has an effect, from my understanding. But just know that depending on the grounding, the mechanical grounding system can backfeed, and you wouldn't know unless you used an ohm meter or excuse me, not an ohm meter. Let me rephrase that. A test meter that measures body voltage, or millivolts. And then what you do is you would hold on to the positive probe of that, right? And then you could take and you would want to have the negative side naturally grounded, right? And then you would touch a surface, a grounded surface, and if that, then you can measure your millivolts. It'll go up or it'll go down. If it's grounded properly, it'll go down. if it's not because of the way that the infrastructure is, it'll actually go up. Okay, this is really important to know. So here's what I recommend at the end of the day. So when I do design on homes, I know I'm kind of bouncing here. When I'm doing a design on a home, and this is a perfect thing for you for what you're doing, I like to take and separate a ground wire that gets driven into the earth in that 8 foot urethra that you're talking about, 10 foot, and then create your own specific outlets that are isolated to that ground wire throughout your home. And then you would just have an isolated outlet, knowing that when you plug whatever kind of a grounding adapter or grounding sheet or mat or something like that, that you're truly grounded deep into the earth.
That's really cool. That's a great idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big takeaway.
Uh, Over the years, I've seen, like Clint Ober. I heard him, at, his documentary. I almost saw him speak live, but he didn't show up for that down in San Diego years ago. But they were selling grounded, what are they called? Computer mouse mats and floor mats for your office desk. And
Yeah,
years ago, I stopped doing that because there is that effect of potentially picking up, the electric field
yep,
nearby and
yep,
channeling that into the body. So now I
yep,
don't ground at my computer anymore, only when I sleep. And I
yeah,
just like the red blood cell effect of making them less sticky. And
yeah,
that's if that's all I'm doing, that's enough for me to keep grounding. I don't care if I'm picking up stray fields and stuff. I mean, I turn my Wi-Fi off when I'm sleeping. But I definitely go rod to earth.
yep,
And ideally beefing it up from the one that I sell, that's just the standard fairly short one to a beefier rod. I think it's a good idea if possible, but I'm so high in the mountains. I have no Wi-Fi signal anywhere near me besides my own. So I'm in a perfect place to ground up here. But I definitely feel the difference when I've gone nights where I don't ground as an experiment when I sleep. And I think going off how you feel is
of
a
course.
great thing.
That's number one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, even if somebody says, "Hey, do this or take this," and you're not feeling better,
Yeah.
you're trying to push through. No, it's just follow your intuition on that. Back
Yeah.
to the grounding piece. So you and I talked about even like here we are, we're pouring a concrete slab, super
Mhm.
conductive, right? It's going to help ground, which it will. It's a great material for
Mhm.
that. But now, if we're focused on like radon mitigation and control or vapor, or say we're moisture vapor coming up through the ground through the concrete into the environment, right? That's moisture content, right? We're going to do a vapor barrier, and so that vapor barrier, if it's properly done, you're kind of you kind of isolating yourself. And you're still going to get some grounding effects because somewhere some footing connected to the concrete with
Yeah.
some steel, there's going to be some earth grounding coming in through that no matter what. However, I think it's a great added benefit to do like that system like I'm talking about. Like it's not a problem, when you're doing your
Mhm.
wiring infrastructure, and this is how I'm wiring all my homes now. We're just going to take a dedicated uh, code doesn't really accept it, but you don't have to connect it, to get, just to say, hey, this is the grounding system. You could even just kind of bury it in the wall, get it past your finals, and then pull that ground system, whoop, hook it up to
Yeah.
that UFA rod. And again, you could have receptacles. Again, you would want to put them on their own grounding so you're not being influenced. I think it's just really good to have that education, just to know that you depending again on some systems, again, it's how it's all wired. You can put that ground in and you're not absorbing any electrical fields through that grounding mat. It just depends, but it's such a
Yeah.
crapshoot. You just don't know. But if you go right directly to the earth ground, now you're getting that full on benefit without any influence to that. Yeah.
Wouldn't you only need that for the bedroom, or why would you need multiple outlets, I guess,
Oh,
is
just if
what I'm
you
wondering.
wanted multiple, yeah, just if people wanted to do, have the grounding sheets and
Guest bedroom or something, or
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it
Okay.
doesn't have
I
to
see.
be through the whole house. Just,
I see.
where you would want to put some grounding devices, or you could even have a grounding mat. Again, you're going to get some on the concrete, but then if you start putting like wood, engineered wood,
Yeah.
um or ceramic tile, now you completely kind of isolated yourself from that whole reason, right? I'm a big advocate. I like concrete. Concrete's my background. We'd like to polish concrete. And so I've always been fascinated by concrete. And, we didn't get into crystals, but like even embedding crystals or, adding like a shungite powder and sprinkling it into the concrete and all these different types of things. So you're kind of like maybe you're shielding yourself from anything, but you're getting that added benefit of that in the concrete. So I like the connection of the concrete. And so if you're doing concrete, I think that's a great idea.
That's cool. Yeah, that's what I did in my V1 version one of my lodestone bathtub. Magnetic rock
Oh, nice.
magnetite's been struck by lightning from a mine in Utah. I
Oh,
mixed in
wow.
shungite powder and pyrite and magnetite into the grout, and then I
Awesome.
also painted on the wall. So I'm gonna do
Yeah.
version two in the bunker, which is gonna be way better. I don't want flat stones. It's gonna be super rough. I mean, the floor relatively flat, but still natural, where I'm
Okay.
not doing any unnatural cuts like I did in my old lodestone bathtub. And yeah, big fan of those. I already have them in my koi pond, and they pump out pretty strong magnetism. I have a
Do they?
digital milligauss meter, and
Do they?
they are very strong. So
Awesome.
um, pretty cool, a little natural magnetic treatment there. But yeah, so many other things that you offer. Uh, I wanted to talk about like
There was
the
there was so much we didn't talk about.
I know. Maybe we could talk on the air because I know my situation with roughly 8,000 square foot bunker is going to be with a pyramid on top, and it's going to be way different. And once the dome gets on top, I think it'll make it easier for air exchange. But I'm such a fringe example. But most homes probably HVAC system. And my first show was with David Milburn of Hypoallergenic Air, and his
Hmm.
whole thing is turn your HVAC system into an air filtration, because air
Yeah.
filtration is only as good as air getting to it. And so a
Yep.
lot of people using these filter, and what's funny is with the marketing with these standalone filters is that's like, they market that, oh, it does this and that, and it removes this from the air, and that's on high. How often do people have it cranked? Never. It's on low
Because
because
of the
it's too
noise.
noisy.
Yeah.
Eh, yeah, and so when I was living in California, like a year and a half ago, I was all excited for the HVAC system, and I put in the MERV, and I learned you can't
Hmm.
go too high because that inhibits the airflow, and on the
Yep.
intake, and I was learning all about that and ceiling fans and moving air.
Yep.
But I realized when I was going to bed, when it kicks on, just I'm just super sensitive to noise,
Yeah.
and it was so nerve wracking to hear that now I don't know if I'm a fan of the if I'm going to do that in the bunker, or if I'm going to try to figure out an
Okay.
alternative solution to that, because it is really about air movement, right? I mean, you just want the air to be moving.
Yeah, so we have climate control on whatever the practices are for that, whether it's a passive solar home or whether it's a below grade home. We want to find, ultimately the gold standard would be a natural way of climate. Okay.
Yep.
That would be great. Cross flow ventilation, natural air movement, but we don't always have that luxury either. And that's where I've worked high and low. Like I work with a lot of radiant floor systems. We work with a lot of different, you know, passive style, what we refer to as ERV, where it'll bring in fans, will bring in filtered air in the location. Everything's balanced and pressurized, right? Just perfectly, because there's a science to that. And then fans will actually pull out the old air. Lunos is one of them. Zendar has their systems. I mean, there's numerous what's called ERV, energy recovery ventilators. In your area, it would be an HRV, heat recovery ventilator, for your cooler climates. But I'm a huge proponent. And filtration. So we've got climate control, we have ventilation, and we have filtration. Those are the three things. And without having some kind of a handling system, and I've been trying to get rid of ductwork. I'm trying to, again, we can't always just build a solar passive home or below grade home. We need to be able to control these three topics, right? They're all three very important topics. Obviously, climate, we want to be comfortable. The ventilation, we talked about the plastic homes, not having that proper ventilation. Again, if you're in a fire prone area, it's not, maybe you can't open up the windows year round or whatever, and then again, the filtration, because, using these portable systems, it's just going to be kind of a room by room. They're noisy. You got to constantly be changing the filters on them. And to me, it's just not, it's a great approach if you can't design or build, or renovate, they're great. They have their place. Don't get me wrong. But I'm looking at, I want to be able to filter and bring in natural air on a very large volume into that home, because I want to pressurize that home under a positive pressure. I don't want any infiltration. I don't want any leakage. I don't want to be pulling out outside allergens and mold spores from outside, because I have this very powerful, robust system that's just sucking air like a vacuum, right? We want to bring in air, but we want to pressurize that air, and we want to balance the air of how much air we're moving back out. So we're keeping the home under a slight positive pressurization, and within that envelope, we are bringing in, using ERV or HRV technologies. We're actually bringing in fresh air, and then now we have that fresh air that gets pre-filtered with the actual device or system itself. But then now that brings us into filtration. And I want to be able to high volume. I want to be able to filter that air through the whole house. I want supplies in every room of that house, bringing me in the highest level grade, medical grade, HEPA, MERV 16 filtration system all the time in that home. And that's where an air handling system is going to allow us to create, however we're going to plumb in the ventilation, the fresh air, how we're going to dump it into an air handling system. Like if we went to just say mini split systems, or, and I don't have a reason against them. You just got to clean them all the time, or anything against them. But that's just climatizing the air. It's not filtering the air. It's not bringing fresh air in. So that's where I just don't see getting away from like an air handling HVAC kind of a system. You need something that's going to bring in that fresh air, that's going to filter that fresh air, that's going to distribute that fresh air throughout that environment. And again, I bring that up in the case to where maybe, maybe certain times of year, you're kind of up in your area where there could be fires in the distance, and, you have that smoke and you have to create that environment. Or, hey, maybe there's a high pollen allergen count. Like, there's times that we do want to separate ourselves from that external environment, and to be able to live in this environment where we have superior air quality, and that indoor air quality. And of course, that ties in with the whole aspect of mold too, right? So we talked about building mold resistant, using mold resistant materials, using breathable materials, but we didn't really get into the indoor air quality aspect of that. And the indoor air quality and the science of that is huge on managing, again, that air distributed evenly throughout the house to keep that house climatized, or that whatever that living environment climatized within that perfect temperature range, that perfect humidity range, and knowing that air is constantly being scrubbed and cleaned, using more of mechanical filtration, getting into different like UV or these hydroxyl, or not ozone, but got to be careful, because some of these systems by default, or these bipolar ionization systems, ozone. Right, you produce ozone, right? And that's a big, and for you, I'm sure that's a topic, right? Because we don't want to be creating, again, the whole positive ionic. Now we have ozone injecting into the system by default of these systems, right? I'm not totally against them. If, for example, I might use like a UV type system in the actual coil of a condensing system, because it's, especially depending on what the climate is, or how we've mechanically designed the house, or what the humidity, what the average humidity levels are in the area. Because you got to keep in mind, those coils for these air handling systems, they're constantly sweating, they're constantly putting out moisture, right? So it's really important that we're, plumbing, that we're making sure that the vent assemblies are good for these drain lines, but also too to actually use a UV light just in that area. Could be low level, but we want to just make sure that we secure or reduce any types of microbial growth. And I'm talking just that area. I'm not talking about overblasting everything and then just pumping all this UV back into the system. Okay. So so I'll do, again, it depends on the region, depends on the design, the house, like all these types of things. And when we're doing the mechanical system. So I always like to go from a new design and like just like, engineer it that way. What I like about your upcoming project, and I'd like to have a live show, maybe come up there. We can
That'd be
really
awesome.
kind of get into these things once we figure the design.
Yeah, I'm
And
trying to resist focusing on the bunker because there's just so
yeah,
many questions that
yeah,
most people
yeah.
probably won't care about because they're not going to ever have a build a bunker. So
Well, but it's a good example because we'll kind of work through all these things. Okay, well, in this example, we're below grade, so we're a little more even climatized. However, we do want to focus on these indoor air quality things like we're just now talking about. So we can have this bunker, but how are we getting the fresh air ventilation in? How is that air being treated? How is it being filtered? How are
yeah,
we distributing that air? There's a lot of pieces that do go into that bunker.
yeah, we'll be standing at an undisclosed stump somewhere on the mountain where that's the air that's coming in. Yeah, what's cool is that with Air Oasis, and I'm not even an affiliate for them. They don't have an affiliate program, but their bipolar doesn't create any ozone. So I don't know how they achieve that. But I
Yeah,
know a lot of the
yeah.
bipolar systems do create ozone, so that's kind of
Yeah,
cool. But
it's so hard, Matt, and you're probably better at this than I am. But man, when you start reading like all the bipolarization and these different companies and how they explain it, it's so over my head. I can't even. I'm like, man, I don't even know what. I don't understand this. Like,
yeah,
somebody has to interpret all that stuff for me because they're claiming it's not producing anything, but it's in languages that it's very difficult for me, and I know what I'm looking for to understand.
I do have a pretty expensive ozone meter, so I could hold it in front of it and test it.
Oh,
I
do you?
forget the brand, but
Is
yeah,
it
I just have to.
is it Wolf? What meter do
Um,
you have?
it's at my other house. I'm still in the process of moving. It's a little handheld deal. I can't remember what brand, but actually I take that back. It's a negative ion measure. So yeah, I
That's
don't have
I
one.
have that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
I
yeah.
do that
Yeah.
one too. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I've actually measured some, and they weren't. It wasn't high concentration. It was a slight positive, but not. Those are cool meters just to kind
Yeah.
of geek out on. I use those meters, by the way. If there's a lot of synthetics in the
Mhm.
environment, if there's acrylic paintings or finishes or wall coatings and it's not breathable and there's carpet that's synthetic, you can go in there with one of those meters that, I mean, it's just off the charts with a positive ion in that environment, but you're using it for so much more than that. The air movement, what's bringing in, what the exchange is, that's what I use that meter for, just to identify, for the client to help
Mhm.
quantify, hey, this is why we want to reduce these things, because if we bring in the natural elements, hey, let's go outside, let's take out the meter outside, hey, look,
Mhm.
oh wow, it's dropped down to like a negative count, so
Yeah.
like this is what we want, when people see those numbers and terms, it's very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a fun meter. Well, Brian, do you want to get into some of the questions? We won't
Yes,
get through all of them, but I'll at least pick the good ones that we didn't cover. You did cover a lot of them.
I
Um,
apologize for your audience, man, because we were talking about a lot of stuff, and
eh,
there's so much more that we just still need to cover. So we'll capture this over a live show or something. Hopefully, Matt.
you
But
just
let's
have to
get
come
into
up to
this.
Idaho. Yeah.
Yes, let's do it.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. We'll just hit a few here. Gas versus electric, safety, fumes, efficiency. I assume they're talking about a range. So,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, living in the mountains, even the California mountains, all the places I've had at a gas stove without any ventilation. And I actually made a post about this a couple months ago on how I think it was contributing to my brain fog and a lot of issues because actually carbon monoxide poisoning, which you can get from an unventilated gas
yep.
stove,
You
not to
bet.
answer this question myself, but it's like
Yeah,
lipid peroxidation in the brain goes up. You're peroxidizing your lipid membranes and your
yeah,
neurons. It's huge neuroinflammation issues. it's a big deal, right? To not
Very
have
big,
venting outside.
very big deal. Very big deal. I'd like to add, it blows my mind when I do these home inspections that I'll see a lot of these return filtered systems. It just blows me away. Like I'm like, they're all you're doing is you're taking it, throwing it through a charcoal screen or something, and you're bringing it right back into the environment. It just, who came up with that? Like it just, why? So
Yep.
that's always one of the number one things that I'm looking for is that we're getting outside venting. There's a piece to that too. You have to make sure that everything's balanced. So if you are building, designing a home or renovating a home, you do a big fan, which I highly recommend that we do some ventilation, but there you have to balance everything. So sometimes you have to bring makeup air in to balance that, because if you put everything too much under that negative pressure, you're going to start getting infiltration issues. So just note that that's just kind of a little nuance to our subject here, but definitely a proponent of having, fan tech makes these inducted fans. You can put them on a variable switch. They're quiet. You can put them up in an attic. You don't hardly even hear the noise. So now you're creating a lower decibel, because that's where a lot of people don't want to run their fan. So for one is if you have a recirculating one, get rid of that. We need to plumb it outside. If you do want to upgrade, you want that ventilation. Fantech makes a great inducted fan. You don't have to get your typical Wolf or, whatever kind of a fancy system. You can just do a nice custom hood with an inducted fan. Nor this meaning. And then also too, gas versus electric. Sorry for your the question on that. The last piece, I've measured electric. You have induction, and then you have these, electric cooktops. The electric, they're just not as user friendly, if you will. And they do put out AC magnetics. Okay, the induction, they're pretty cool. You can tune them. The customability is awesome, but they produce more AC magnetics than a microwave. So you kind of have to pick your poison. Do you want it in your face or do you want it at waist level? Right? It's crazy. I haven't measured one, and it's a big topic that I think I would love, any input, feedback from anyone that's been investigating this, because you got to remember a lot of them do put out, we're talking a lot of AC magnetics right at waist level. So that's something to consider. Again, we still want the ventilation regardless, from the cooking oils and the carbon, the carbon monoxide issues of that alone, right? Gas, obviously, a lot of people like their gas, the tunability of gas, or propane, whatever. Again, back to proper ventilation still applies, whether it's gas, whether it's electric. You want these, that's a whole topic in itself, but like you can customize hoods. You want to oversize your hoods. I know people don't want their hoods in the way of being able to see where they're cooking, but the bigger the hood, the better. And if you are selecting CFM, the amount of volume of air that you're pulling out, sometimes you have to consider bringing air in to counteract that for balancing. It's really important.
Those are awesome tips. Yeah. So much I'm thinking I could do in my bunker with the fan tech and stuff, because the one I'm using down here is pretty loud, even on low. So
that's why a lot of people don't use them, if they do have them. So use your fan if you have it,
Absolutely.
And hopefully it's vented outside. And if it's not, vented outside.
Yeah, I feel the difference. It's huge difference. Thoughts on hemp blocks? I forget if you brought this up earlier. ICCF is superior, right? Is that what you would say?
Yeah. So on hemp, okay. I love this topic. So there's all kinds of alternative ways to building, these non-toxic, highly thermally insulated homes. That are, again, the hydrophilic, their way that they absorb moisture and release moisture. You got rammed earth, so that you're using just natural earth with about 8% Portland cement. You're ramming it, and you're creating these sedimentary, beautiful walls. You have ICF. That's just a block that you're basically filling full of concrete. The ICCF, the composite, right? Hemp, Hemp, I would say hemp is kind of like hemp and rammed earth are very similar. The nice thing about the hemp is they're actually using the hemp to grind down, creating this fibrous material, creates a little bit of a porosity, which increases the R value, not as high as you could probably get with an ICCF, depending on how thick you build the wall. Very labor intensive. It has natural antimicrobial properties to it. It's breathable. Again, has insulative values. I think it's fantastic. But it still requires about 8% Portland cement as well. So if we really want to get into the cement factor of everything, and I probably shouldn't even bring in this conversation, but cement cement manufacturing takes up 8% of the world's power consumption. Clinker cements and how it's so like, don't look at hemp as a total green product to that of concrete, because you're still using about 8% Portland cement in a hemp. But you are in a rammed earth wall too. So we can make an argument to say, is my rammed earth and my hemp home totally green? Well, like how far do we want to go from a carbon negative perspective? But aside of that, I just want to bring that up so people think about, like, even in a hempcrete house, you're still using 8% Portland cement. Depends on the thickness of the wall, how much cement you're going to use, right? Typically, rammed earth is 24 inches thick. By the way, 2 foot thick wall. Imagine that. Hempcrete's going to be, I think you can do the hempcrete down to 12 inches. And then, of course, the ICCF is 12 inches. I like the ICCF, again, because it's more streamlined. It's easier. Any kind of a block layer can build with that. Hempcrete, very labor intensive. Rammed earth, labor intensive. You just don't have to bring in the hempcrete part to the rammed earth. So for me personally, I think the hempcrete is cool, but I think I would just rather, if somebody had the budget and they wanted some kind of a home like this and they wanted to go beyond ICCF, which would be my number one, I would probably defer to rammed earth building. That's just my personal take on that.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah. I don't think we talked about insulation that I can remember.
No,
We had a few
we
questions
didn't.
like healthiest cost-effective option, and does bad insulation of the walls affect our health even when it's sealed?
Um, yeah, so insulation. I'm a big fan of like the mineral rock wool. There's Havelock, the sheep's wool or lamb's wool. Um, I like these types of alternative insulations. Havelocks, they've ramped up their production. It's just a little more pricey. Again, when we're building healthy homes, we're using these alternative materials that are, like the color beam lighting systems, or, these advanced air filtration systems. The costs are going to start going up, right? Like if we were to compare, a custom build to a healthy custom build, you're probably going to be, 20% higher, roughly. I'm just throwing out a quick number to give the audience a perspective on this, right? So every bit of material counts when it starts. I like the Havelock wool, but what I find is mineral rock wool. Whether you can get it in a blow-in, you can get it in formaldehyde free, you can get it in a bat insulation, you can get it in different R values. It's mold resistant, it's bug resistant, termite resistant. It's a breathable material. In a lot of these that I'm just talking about carry all these very similar characteristics. Okay, so that's my go-to. In the insulation industry, a lot of companies are really cleaning up the formaldehydes. Even from fiberglass insulation, they're getting rid of the paper faced, right? And that's the mold growth source, right? So, so now they're not, and they're getting away from all of the plastics and all the stuff that they're using. Again, mineral rock wool is kind of my gold standard. There's no paper product on it. There's no vapor membrane on it. It's just pure mineral rock wool. And again, you can get it in different R values depending on your wall cavity size. It's breathable, carries a lot of great characteristics, and it's readily available. So your contractor, if he's upgrading and renovating your home, this is something that right now currently is pretty readily available.
That's awesome. Yeah, I looked it up too, and there's actually a train fairly nearby. So this house that I'm in currently, until I get to the bunkers, kind of loud when the train, honks its horn. And so I've been learning a little bit about sound insulation, and I guess each material has a different what you mentioned earlier, the decibel blocking.
Yeah. So you get the decibel blocking too. Again, if you're doing a mass wall, you're going to get that decibel blocking. But if you're doing a framed house, um, darn it, if you're doing a framed, sorry, calls coming in.
It's okay.
If you're doing a framed home, there's different techniques that you can use to reduce the decibels. You're probably not going to get a lot of that just from insulation. There's different, you know, suppression methods. You could double frame a wall, offset the framing. Because on like wood construction, a lot of the sound vibration, believe it or not, is coming through that actual stud
Oh, wow.
itself. Which is not insulated, right?
Makes sense. Okay.
So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. This is a good one. Mitigating EMF from solar panels on the roof. Should you block it with paint, or what are your thoughts on solar panels, roof mounted?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a good topic for you and I to have down the road too. So solar, there's certain instrumentation that actually measures the radiation from the photovoltaic conversion of the sun, right? To my knowledge, of working with some engineers, it's a low field. It's a smaller field. Okay, it's not a big field. The concern really is the conversion of that AC or that, excuse me, that DC through the AC through the inverter process. We kind of didn't really talk a whole lot on that one, but the from my knowledge is, for example, even if you're doing like a metal roof or a tiled, like a concrete tiled roof or something like that, and the roof is high enough, you're not going to be affected by any radiation of these panels. I would prefer, just because if I'm building, my forever home that's going to last multi generations and hundreds of years, the less penetrations on a roof, I think the better. Um, so it would be nice if you have the luxury to put the solar system away from the house. Anyways, that would be my ultimate recommendation here.
I
Um,
like the pole mount. Yeah.
yeah, peg mounted system, absolutely. That would be ideal if you can go that direction. Also, if you were concerned that there are shielding, you could do the shielding fabrics like we talked about. The silver that'll help like shield anything from that as well, because it's like a radio frequency coming from that. But you could just do that like in your attic. So if you are going to put those on there, you could do some additional shielding to help if there was a concern. But according to working with electrical engineers in this field, it's a low, like you wouldn't want it right next to your room, right? But if you're distanced from that, it's not a concern. Okay.
Okay, sweet. Oh, just an esoteric one here near the end. We had some questions about, I guess it's more of a feng shui. Someone mentioned Vastu. I think it's like a
Oh yeah,
Indian philosophy.
Vastu. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
another person asked, does the shape of our home matter? Should we be building round homes? Like, I'm excited in the bunker. I think I told you to use, I think it's called shotcrete, to like make all the corners rounded, and I can hide the conduit in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on square? I think they call it what, poison
Uh,
arrows, like the square corners.
yes. Yeah. All of this golden ratio and sacred geometry. And I mean, yeah, there's definitely, I mean, this goes back thousands of years, right? The architecture, the way that energy moves.
Mhm.
I've studied just a little bit with the Vastu, biogeometry, a little bit into the feng shui. I mean, there's a lot of validity to all of these modalities, if you will,
Mhm.
in design. However, this is just me. I recognize using like a biogeometry from understanding, geopathic stressors or ley lines, and just kind of which can have some effect on maybe where you move something,
Mhm.
not so much as an orientation. Um, Vastu is a lot of orientation and design, kind of like feng shui. Um, I think it's a great piece to like. I think the Vastu is cool or the feng shui. If
Mhm.
you are designing and you're working with somebody that has this specialty to bring them in on the team, I think it's great. However, I get a little nervous for myself, just as me. Like if I want to design a home a certain way, maybe I don't want a dome. Maybe I don't want a pyramid. Or maybe I don't
Mhm.
want it to face this direction because there's a beautiful mountain view the other direction
Mhm.
and it gives me a view of the valley and I get to walk out on my deck and enjoy that. But because of certain things, I don't want that to be altered, or if I want a very modernized method, then this is what I do. Then I bring in the practitioners, right? The biogeometry practitioners or, Vastu practitioners to come in there to offset doing, what they do as far as like mitigation and the way that they'll place things or even crystals and, things like that. I know it kind of gets out there maybe for some people, but this does go back thousands of years. I mean, this
Yeah.
is proven technology.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think if you had, in Vastu, it's not super expensive to hire a practitioner, to look over your plans. Maybe we're working with an architect, and yeah, definitely, working with Vastu's cool. Totally down for it. If you can bring a Vastu practitioner, go over your plans, they can maybe make some tweaks, but just be prepared. It might affect your design a little bit.
Yeah, I got a red door here. I think that's as far as I went on this current house. So painted my chose a red color for my front door.
Yep.
But Brian, this was so awesome. We better wrap it up because we've been going a while. So yeah, appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and wisdom. Synergy 360.com, right? S Energy 360.
Yeah, you got it. S
Yep.
energy is so it's like source energy. So Synergy
It's cool.
360 because it's a synergistic way of building, of looking at everything 360. It's just not one aspect. We're looking at everything. So yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Synergy 360 or go to our website synergy360.com and definitely reference this show with Matt here and I'll give everybody a free 30-minute consult and
Oh, cool.
any way that I can help, and that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to help reshape and redefine the construction industry and bring in all the ideas of how we can create healthy home design in all so many different facets. So thanks for having me, Matt.
Amazing. I had a blast. And you're based out of Tucson, Arizona. Is that where you are?
Yeah, yeah, based out of
Okay,
Tucson, but I work all over the country. So
cool.
just know that. Yeah, and I'll look forward to connecting with you and going further into this. Was really broad, I felt.
Yeah.
We can get more into specifics as far as like the pillars of water and indoor air quality. Again, building materials. And all those mechanical systems, electrical systems, inverter systems, solar systems, so we can go further into that. And it would be great to have a show. If, all your listeners like, hey, look, we want to know more, let's do it. So,
I'm open to that. Yeah, we didn't even touch the water filtration part, which is
yeah,
just a huge topic. So
yeah, that's a show in itself. They all are just shows in themselves. Lighting, all of these are just literally shows of themselves. So this was definitely a very broad general overview, but definitely let's go deeper into it. Or if somebody has a specific question, reach out to me and we can go deep on that.
I love it. Well, you shared a lot of great practical tips, and like we talked about at the beginning, I think this is it's an overlooked aspect, underappreciated, and um, we have these nutrient burn rates, whether it's vitamin C or magnesium and all these stressors, and if we could lower those burn rates, then maybe
Yeah,
we can take less dose of different supplements, and you really want to. I mean, if you have the money and you can do it, building from scratch and implementing the stuff that you're
yeah.
talking about is going to pay off huge in the future.
Create your sanctuary for sure. Get yourself healed, get yourself on that path, and definitely. Yeah, we definitely want to look at the homes, at least creating that sanctuary to heal in for sure. Give the body a place to get back to homeostasis, on top of all of our supplementations and our good regimens, and how we eat nutrition. So it's definitely a vital piece to it all. So
Absolutely. Right on. Well, thanks, Brian. Stick around as we close out the show. Thanks for coming on.
thank you.
One of the reasons I love hosting this show is because I get to see so many different perspectives. I really wasn't expecting Brian to be pro LED, because now it's pretty trendy, like even RFK is talking about incandescent light bulbs. And with human health, the conversation should always be nuanced because it's complex. I have a history of living 100% off grid. And I really think if you have a bigger off grid house like I had with several lights, I don't know if incandescents are generally practical. You're going to have to go LED, especially if you don't have a ton of money to spend on a huge battery bank to store all that power when the sun goes down. Every watt matters. And if you're on grid, this conversation doesn't matter. But I know a lot of people aspire to be off grid or semi off grid, where the reliance on the grid is almost nothing. And I think LEDs at that point make sense, especially what Brian was talking about with the color rendering index, looking for a high one, looking for low flicker, and just the highest quality LEDs you can get. I know every time I stay at an Airbnb or a hotel, I don't even need the slow motion feature on my iPhone or a meter to tell that that is super stressful on my eyes. I feel it immediately. So when I stay at an Airbnb, I always bring my own bulbs with me. And even if I switch out just a few, I keep it pretty dim at night. Makes a huge difference in my quality of sleep and just the health of my nervous system. I think one of the reasons why this podcast is a lot more engaging and interesting than the other ones out there that are boring and monotone are that I have on so many different points of view. And a lot of those points of view I don't even agree with, yet I still give them a platform. I would definitely raise some red flags if your health educator is really black and white in their thinking, whether they're only pro-metabolic, repeat people, or only carnivore, or only keto. I think there's so many gray areas in life. We're human, we change and go through cycles and phases, and that's natural. As long as the intention is not to follow a fad and it's pure self-experimentation and self-discovery, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I've been shamed for doing that, being very public with my experiments, which is just ridiculous and shows the culty mentality that's prevalent in the natural health world. So I love what Brian's sharing. He's putting out really great information. Check out his Instagram. It's Senergy360. That's SENERGY 360. I look forward to getting him up here in Idaho to help me plan out my underground bunker, because there's going to be so many logistical things going into making that a healthy place to live. And all of my above ground spots, but I would prefer at night to be underground. So I'm really excited for that. And it'll be fun to dial in air filtration, lighting, airflow, the EMF stuff, all of it. His website, Senergy360.com. Again, Senergy360.com to listen to other shows that he's been on. And if you'd like to work with him, you can connect with him there. My website is matt-blackburn.com. I actually just added a new product up on the website. So if you click shop and then click the EMF Shield category, you'll see the Pure Power plugin from Static Shield. And this is a really advanced dirty electricity filter. I actually just interviewed the founder yesterday and was blown away with his knowledge of this subject. He's been studying it for well over a decade, almost 20 years. And he really knew his stuff. And he took what was already out there on the market with dirty electricity filters and just took it to the next level. So you actually need less of the filters when you use the Static Shield brand versus the other ones. So I'm going to do a lot of testing here at the house actually today after I record this with my meter, because it's always good to measure and really be strategic with where you place these filters. And I also learned that incandescent lights turn these distortions and bad harmonics into heat. They actually transmute the dirty electricity into heat. So incandescent light bulbs like the Hudson ones I have throughout my home here are dirty electricity filters. Are they as powerful as his? I didn't ask BD Erickson that question. I would imagine the answer is no, but it's still something, and it's still better than nothing. So that was really interesting to me. That blew my mind. Another reason why I love having this podcast, I learned so many mind-blowing things that I can implement immediately in my own life and feel the effects on my body. My brand is Mitolife. You can find that at mitolife.co. We sell a under-counter 7-stage water filter. It's called a 7-stage water solution. That's really a great place to start with your health, is by the quality of your drinking water, whether you're using it to cook your pasta, brew your teas, brew your coffee, wash your produce. It just goes on, the application of having super clean filtered water. It was back around 2012 when I found this type of technology, which is beyond RO, because a lot of people have the misconception that you have 3 choices with water filtration: our alkaline water ionizers, our distilled water, and our reverse osmosis. And all of those are dead processed water. The programming goes, and so drink spring water because it's alive and it's charged and blah, blah, blah. It's a lot of sales pitch there. And you'll say, well, they're not making money off of promoting spring water. Well, a lot of people actually are. And if they aren't, they're still selling you on their lifestyle. They're building rapport so that you buy the other stuff that they talk about. So everything is a sales pitch, essentially. Just welcome to modern life. It just is what it is. But from my experience, filtered water changes the way that your brain functions. You're no longer getting all of these natural and unnatural acids in the water that have a lot of detrimental effects. So you need deionization to remove those acids. And that is just one of the steps in the Mitolife filter. And it's also combined with sediment and KDF, carbon, reverse osmosis, remineralization, which everyone freaks out about with not having minerals in the water. We're actually designed to get our minerals from the food, not from our water. So I use Icelandic sea salt from Crucial 4. It's my friend Charles down in Texas. He has great clean salt that's lab tested. And then I take a gram of Shilajit every day in tablet form. That's the Mitolife Panacea product. And I've been taking that before it was cool. Now you have people out there pronouncing it Shilajat, Shigalet. There's all of these marketers that have come on the scene that are trying to ride a wave. It is one of the primary antidotes to several of today's poisons that we're exposed to daily. The NPK fertilizer, if you have a history of medical medium, celery juice cleansing, green juice cleansing, your brain got severely hammered with the NPK salt-based fertilizer that food was grown in. And so Shilajit is the antidote to get your noggin back on track and get those neurons firing correctly, because the fulvic and humic acid are able to break down those inorganic minerals that you have now stuck inside of you. So there's a lot of carnivores that were ex-vegans, and they think that the protein and the B vitamins and the minerals in meat healed them, which is part of it, but they're missing the supplement piece. And that's why they're stuck on the spring water kick. They don't get that filtered water is crucial and really the only way to go when it comes to drinking water. And I think that misfiring in the brain is caused by being anti-supplement, by only going for meat to recover from veganism. But no, it's actually a mix of meat and dairy and shilajit that is the true vegan recovery. And then you start adding in vitamin K2, which I know I was deficient in for the first 30 years of my life, at least. And that vitamin K2 improves electron flow in the mitochondria, and you can't get enough vitamin K2 from food. It's impossible. And you just keep stacking these things, and you can really go as far as you want with the recovery. And that's where I'm at 15 years into this, and just feeling better and better every year. And having this podcast, I'm just learning so many important things with mitigating all of the modern toxicity that we have to learn how to navigate through. So if you enjoy the show, please share it with your family and friends. I've been severely shadow banned on social media for the last 2 years. Everybody says that, but it is true for me. I must have hit all the buzzwords during COVID, so my reach is very small. So please share this with your family and friends, get the word out. And there's a new show every Friday. Check me out on Instagram, Matt Blackburn, and also MitoLife on there. Between those two accounts, there's so much free information. And I will see you guys next Friday. Stay supercharged and stay rogue.